Hey everybody, it's Ken McElroy here with the Ken McElroy podcast, and I'm here with Nicole Srednicki. Hi, Nicole.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
So, many of you guys know that I've been doing a lot of health conscious things throughout my life. I met Nicole through actually Robert Kiyosaki,
Yes.
and Nicole does a lot of Robert and Kim Kiyosaki's work. And through my journey, I've learned a lot from her and Radha Gopalan, her partner in the business Ultra Healthy Human. And what we're going to talk about today are a bunch of things. Now, the reason why I wanted Nicole on the podcast was because Nicole's your typical A student that worked really hard, got into the medical field, was in the middle of the grind, making lots of good money, but didn't really have a real quality life. She was working a lot. And, you know, it takes a lot of work, obviously, to get through through the different medical schools and through the different certifications. And she was working a lot. And so her quality of life outside of work wasn't that great, even though she was making a lot of money. And so when we met, she ended up leveraging her experience coming out of that, started her own business, and now has bought some real estate. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but that's part of the journey and part of the path we want to discuss. But Nicole, before we get into that, what are 5 things that, you know, people can do to get more healthy? You know, I know, you know, I've done a lot with you. So what are some of the things that people can do, really simple things that they can do right now today to make them feel better?
So, first of all, thank you, Ken, for having me on the show. I want to start by saying, top 5 things. Something that a lot of people don't really think about is age management. So, we start aging very, very young, but we don't start manifesting symptoms until later in life. And so, you know, there's basic things like the way we eat and exercising and things like that. But when we think about true age management, we want things to really halt the aging process. And one of the newest things that I've brought into my practice is called exosomes. And exosomes are the latest science in stem cell technology. So there's been a lot of hype about stem cells, but exosomes are actually the mechanism of action for these stem cells, and these actually help regenerate your own cells and tissues to keep you young and help to regenerate tissues like if you're having knee arthritis or an autoimmune issue like asthma, things like that. I think these are huge things that people, until they get really sick, kind of neglect, and I think it's something that people need to be mindful of at a very, very young age. And then just some other things that people can be doing is, looking at heavy metal status. So it's something that, Ken, you and I have talked about a lot. And our environment, unfortunately, is horrible no matter how healthy we try to be. So I encourage people to kind of look outside the box and do things like get your heavy metals checked.
So what she's talking about there is I did some blood work. Actually, I've done a bunch of blood work. And a lot of doctors don't take the extra time to look at. Now, I'm not sure exactly, but I know when I go to my other doctor, they would go, "Okay, you're looking good," but then you actually took it a whole different level. You had a different level of blood work, and in that blood work, we found that I had personally high mercury, high lead, and something else.
Sure, aluminum.
Aluminum. So I had those in my system for whatever reason, but my primary doctor didn't see that. So then we went through this process called chelation, right?
Yep.
So you can explain, because I think a lot of people go to their primary doctors, and when I start going to you, you're like, yeah, well, this is like the basic thing that we do for blood work or hormone work or whatever, but then there's a whole nother level, right? Can you walk me through that?
Sure. And that's another aspect of preventative medicine or age management. And that's really looking at these fine details, and also part of why I started my own practice. I wasn't really happy with just conventional medicine for my patients, because all it did was screen for, very basic disease that might already be there, or, when something's already going wrong and you're having symptoms. But what I do is I try to almost forecast, what's down the road. And so, I look at very extensive blood work. Heavy metals is one example. I look at inflammatory markers, and this looks at, your cellular layers and your tissues to see, is there something abnormal starting very early on that we can stop now so that we don't have to deal with the ramifications later? Just like heavy metals. Heavy metals are known as neurotoxins. They'll increase your risks of cancer, premature aging, Alzheimer's disease, horrible diseases that no one ever should have to live with. And so that's why we did this screening very early on, even though you weren't having symptoms.
Right.
And so when we saw that you did have very high levels, we started working to get this out of your tissues so that they didn't accumulate, which they do over time.
What I thought was cool was I was fine on like 100 things.
Correct.
Right. But there were 3 or 4 things that I was high on. And what I found most interesting was that, we're actually getting preventative. You said these high levels will turn into potentially Alzheimer's and cancer and things like that. And what I really found interesting is my primary doctor had the same blood, obviously, from me, and they're within the tolerance level. So they had a tolerance level that was okay to have all this, right?
Right.
And I went to you and you're like, okay, well, our tolerance level is 0. We don't want you to have any heavy metals. Whereas you go to a primary doctor, they say, okay, it's okay for you to have a certain amount. So I remember that being, well, why would one doctor, say it's okay to have some heavy metals and you say none, and I think that's the difference of, being healthy long term.
Sure. And that's also why, I sometimes reference conventional medicine as sick care, because that's the way conventional medicine, they train us to, when you're sick, when you're so far down the pathway, then we just start treating symptoms instead of stopping this, which is why I say, no, you should not have any mercury in your blood, not the acceptable amount that, they're telling you is acceptable, because they're putting you in this statistical category with everybody else in the country. And you see it. Look at how packed our hospitals are with sick people and people with all of these symptoms and more cancer and autoimmune issues. And it's because we aren't doing preventative medicine or age management.
Right. It's so important. So the first one was a stem cell. Second one was heavy metals. And what's the third one?
Yes. So stress management.
Yeah.
So that was actually, I finished my doctorate at Georgetown University about a year and a half ago. And my study of interest was stress management. And I wanted to figure out a way that we can decrease stress levels and improve mindfulness to then enhance our work outcomes and our own, the way we function in life and our level of the way we know that stress can affect everything in our life. It can affect our blood pressure. It can affect our relationships. It can affect our business outcomes. And so, doing things, being mindful of this, first of all, we oftentimes build up a tolerance and say, oh, I'm not stressed. And when you actually measure it, like, when I do a scale with a patient to actually see how stressed they are, they're like, oh my gosh, this is one more thing that's going to cause premature aging. And it can actually hinder your own thought processes. So as an entrepreneur, being mindful and keeping my stress in check is so important.
I know. Here's the thing, though. Like, it's hard to recognize.
Yeah.
It's really hard to recognize when Dr. Rada's book came out, the 8 deadly...
Second Opinion, 8 Deadly Diseases.
The Second Opinion, 8 Deadly Diseases. I highly recommend that book. It's all of those things start from stress.
Yep, absolutely.
Basically what he's saying is every single disease that you get it manifests actually from stress.
Oftentimes, yes. And so the stress can actually, it affects first our thought process, which can then trigger an emotion. And then over time, all of these very subtle changes that we might not recognize, they actually start to manipulate our cells, our tissues in our body. And then this is when disease can actually start.
It's bizarre to me, but it's true, right? And so one of the things that I think what happens, especially with entrepreneurs, is, they're going 100 miles an hour and they're trying to balance their health.
Yeah.
They're on a plane, they're flying around, they're in high pressure meetings, they have a lot of times, a lot of employee issues, a lot of financial issues, and a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
Every phone call sometimes can be stressful. And then they go home, and and if they're not in balance there, it's even more. And so how do you recognize stress? Because I know for me, I just like compartmentalized it and moved it over here and just kept plowing away. And I think that's what happens a lot of times is people, they're working really, really hard and they're not recognizing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I think going back to prevention again, making sure that you're having time for you. For me, what I do to help manage my stress is I meditate every morning. I make sure that I'm going to the gym. Those are some of the best ways that I manage my stress. I leave time aside for things. Sometimes I just have to take a step back, and it's very hard to recognize. But I think also having like a health advocate that can help point that out. I often bring this up to my patients when they come in and they're telling me all of a sudden, well, I'm having issues, with my sleep, or I'm feeling more tired, or I'm having headaches. We always go back and assess their stress level.
Right. Yeah. I find I was thinking of this, I have a friend of mine and he literally can't sleep at night. Mm-hmm. And it's because his mind is going 100 miles an hour all the time. And I'm like, hey, you really need to calm down that mind of yours, right? Because once you can calm down and be present and be mindful of what you're thinking, then I think that, you'll start to get a much, much better sleep. And he started doing meditation and some other things, and it started to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as an entrepreneur, it helps you make better decisions.
I for sure. I found that if I don't go to the gym, and of course I meditate, not as religiously as you do, but I do. But I find that I come in to the office a lot more grounded, a lot more present, and I'm making better decisions because I'm not thinking about everything all at once.
Sure. And actually going back to my thesis when I was working on my doctorate, and one component of I trained the participants in meditation, and we had a different type of intervention that we used to try to help people become more mindful of their stress management. But something interesting was what people reported was people around them at work, they were noticing. They had no clue that they were all of a sudden meditating to try to reduce their stress levels. But as we went through this study, people around them were actually noticing they were different. They were easier to get along with. Their decision-making capabilities were better.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So meditation is 3. What's 4?
Detoxification. So this is something that it's a very generalized term. You hear about detoxification, you hear about cleanses, juice cleanses, all different things. And there's different levels. And, one of the things that I work on with my clients is to make sure that we pick a detox that's appropriate for them and that's sustainable so that they can not only reach the goal, but feel empowered and hopefully sustain some of the benefits. Now, I have some patients that come to me for the very first time and they say, oh, no, I eat healthy. I feel great. I don't need to do this. But sometimes we need to be mindful of our environment and the air we're breathing. And no matter how healthy we try to eat, sometimes the foods that we're eating, just like you eat healthy, but we found all of these heavy metals. Right. Yeah. And so, it's all part of age management and kind of taking a step back sometimes, clearing out those toxins. And I put basically all of my patients through some type of detoxification program. And it's so fun to watch this because at the end, they have all benefited in some way. If it's decreased joint pain, they have more energy, they're sleeping better, their skin looks better. So many different things, just kind of going back to the basics.
Yeah. One of the things that I do, as you know, is I do these cleanses, for me, they're 21. I do 2 21-day cleanses a year. And I tell you, at the end of that, and the goal is not necessarily to lose weight, but at the end of that, my digestion's better. My sight is better. I can actually smell better. It's just all the things that you don't realize what your body is kind of
Right.
collecting, during all that process. I have two questions around detox. One is, charcoal. They talk a lot about, I know you've given me some charcoal. How does that work? And then also, like, when you walk into a healthy place and it says, detox juices or whatever, do those work, or should we be using those?
So those are both great questions. So activated charcoal, I do use that sometimes with patients, but it depends on the situation. So, there's tons of studies on all different, herbs and supplements and things, but I always, advise my patients to ask when you have questions. Don't just, you read something or, you see something on TV and then just start taking it in mass quantities, thinking it's going to be the greatest thing for you. So activated charcoal can be great in certain situations, very basic, short-term detoxification, or sometimes when my patients are traveling really far, on airplanes where there's lots of germs and, electromagnetic radiation, taking it for a short period of time. But, if you're having gastrointestinal symptoms like diarrhea, well, to be quite frank, you don't want to just start taking activated charcoal to try to stop it, because you might have actually ingested a bug that could potentially make you very, very sick if you all of a sudden try to stop it. So there's a time and a place. And so, you should always ask your doctor or your health advocate, if it's safe to take it for a certain amount of time. So I do like activated charcoal at certain times.
Okay.
And then regarding like the juice cleanses. So again, it's very individualized in what your goals are. But, in general, when I sometimes advise patients not to do these, 7-day juice cleanses, because it's not something sustainable. And I hear over and over again that, you drink these juices and the first day's horrible. And then after a few days, you're feeling pretty good. And, for patients that want to lose weight, which is oftentimes why they do it, they lose weight, and then the second they're finished, they binge eat and gain all the weight right back, and they're like, okay, why did I just do that? Right. Sometimes it can be good, but sometimes it's also not the most healthy thing, because also with juicing, you have to remember a lot of the nutrients are actually taken out of the juice.
Oh, wow.
So, depending on where you're getting these juices, and then the amount of sugar in them. I mean, I am always harping on patients about sugar, because sugar is so, yes, it's so inflammatory. It increases the risks of diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's. It's huge with Alzheimer's. So, when thinking forward and, wanting to keep your mind straight as long as possible, eliminate sugar from your life. And oftentimes juices are so high in sugar, and it can be very misleading, because sometimes people will look at the container and say, oh, there's only 12 grams of sugar in this, but they forget to look at the serving size, which there's 3 servings in a container of juice. Wow. That's 12 ounces.
That's how they get around it, huh?
Yeah. So it can be very, very misleading. And so I encourage my patients to, for me, I'm very close with my patients. I want to see them succeed in health. And so, I tell them, text me, email me if you have questions.
So www.ultrahealthyhuman. Nicole, those are 4 great ones. Let's go to the 5th one. What do you have?
Yes, this is probably the most important, and it's actually a phrase. And I actually learned this from Robert Kiyosaki, and that is be, do, have.
Yes.
So everybody, we all want health, wealth, and happiness, right? So I'm kind of the health guru here. And so, as an example, so let's say, our have is health. We want to be healthy. And so we have to do something about it. So, we want to lose weight. So we do a cleanse. Now, the third aspect of that, and possibly the most important part of that, is the be. And that is kind of what I call like your internal dialogue. So in order to be able to even do what we need to do to have, which is our health, we need to be. So, having our mindset, when you're ready to lose weight, it has to be this whole, what's going on inside your head, your willpower, your attitude, your emotional intelligence. All of these they all need to be in sync in order to get the end result.
That's right. That's a really good point. Who do you want to be is probably the biggest thing. We talk a lot about that in financial education as well. I remember there was I went to a seminar, and the guy who founded and created Canyon Ranch Spa
Yes.
was the speaker. And I always remember what he said at the very beginning. He said, all these people from all over the world, they fly in, and they've basically been completely unhealthy, and then they come to me and they want me to fix them in a week. And he's like, it doesn't work that way. You have to be mindful of what you're doing all the way along and use me as a tool to get better. But but most people come to these, I don't know, whatever you want to call them, fat farms or spas, to try to, be zen and meditate and eat healthy for a week. It doesn't work that way. And then people leave and they jump right back into their old health and, lifestyles. And what you're saying is what you really need to do is change who you are and,
Yes.
figure out who you want to be, right?
Exactly. And if you're not, another example is, somebody that wants to lose weight. And I try to explain this aspect to them, but sometimes they're so stressed or so resistant to the fact that in the past they haven't been able to lose weight. They've already made up their mind somewhere deep down within them. They're saying, I've already tried all these diets. Well, I don't think this detox is going to work, but I'm going to do it because I want to lose weight. And I say, you need to change that attitude. And, some of these things, it can actually start to manifest. That attitude will manifest physically because that stress will cause their body to produce more cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And cortisol causes you to produce and retain more glucose, which is sugar. That's going to prevent you from losing weight.
Wow. Yeah. I could not agree. It's the same, believe it or not. It's interesting because this is an entrepreneur podcast about, building your financial future but really the truth is this is all connected because when I talk to people who want to, they want to be wealthy, for example, whatever that means to them, let's say in this particular case, it's financial. It is the same thing. They think of themselves as a poor person.
Yep.
And they can't get out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we talk about my real estate journey. It's
good segue.
Yeah.
It's a great segue. Yeah, because one of the reasons I wanted you on the show today was because, you've been super successful in school and obviously what you're doing in your own business, but then you've taken it to the next level and now you're actually building your financial wealth. And we're going to talk about that in the next podcast. And Nicole, thank you very, very much for all that great wisdom on health.
Thank you again for having me.